everyone. In this video we're going to be going through another LeetCode question. This is going to be called Shuffle the Array. The problem number is 1407 and I'm just going to go through it now. So given an array nums consisting of 2n elements in the form x1, x2 up to x of n, and then we have y1, y2 up to y of n. So you mightn't quite understand what it's asking, but if we go down to the example, it might make a little bit more sense. And we can see from this return here, we're basically getting each x and pairing it up with the y. So if we go down to this example, we can see that our input could be 2, 5, 1, 3, 4, 7, and n is 3. So n is sort of, you can imagine it as the amount of places that we're going to skip to get our y, or our corresponding y to our x. So for example, we're going to start off with 2. So we've got 2 here, and our output will be 2 because that will be our x1, let's say. And then we'll move on to 5, but this would be x2. So we don't actually want 5 to be our next element. We want to skip on 3 places because you can see that our n here is 3. So we can go 1, 2, 3, and our fourth element here, when we add 3 to it, is indeed the number 3. So we're going to bring that number down and we're going to fill it in here, and you can see there we've placed 3. Now we want to go back to x2. So x2, remember, is this 5, so we're just going to add that automatically to our output. And now we want to find y2. So again, y2 is going to be on 3 places because 3 is n here. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, and we can see this is 4, so that's how 4 is brought down here. And then similar, our x3 will be 1, and then that corresponds with our 7 here. And you can see we have 7 as our output. So hopefully you have a good idea of what the question is actually asking you. So let's jump into it right now. So we know that we're receiving an array of numbers, and we know we have to send back an array of numbers. So the first thing we can do is define the array that we're going to send back. So this array is going to change because we're going to be pushing to it. So I'm going to use the let keyword in JavaScript rather than the const keyword. So I'm going to say let, and I'm just going to call the variable return array, setting it to an empty array. So the next thing we want to do is we want to return this array. So we'll say return, and the variable that we want to return, which is return array, which we've just created. Now currently we've got nothing in our return array, so currently in this function we would be returning an empty array. So now we have to actually do the logic that will, get us the output that we want. So if we think about it, we want to loop through each of the elements, and maybe not all of the elements in the way we normally would with like a for loop. So maybe we should use a different type of loop. I think a while loop would probably be a good idea for this. So I'll say while, and then we want to go and check something. So there's going to be a condition within inside our while. So we want to check to see when something is less than n. So I guess we could have a counter. So we could have a counter defined outside of our while loop, and we can just call it counter, or we could call it I. So we'll say let, and I'm just going to call this counter, and I'm going to set it to 0 because that's where we're going to be starting off with. So then inside my while loop I'm going to put counter, and while that's less than n, so n is the number that they are providing us, basically telling us how many numbers we're going to have to skip over to get the corresponding y coordinate of each x. And now within inside our while loop we can put our curly brackets, and now we need to define what we're going to do. So to start off with, I'm going to want to push the very first character in my nums array, and then I want to search for that x's corresponding y. So the first element that I'm adding to the array will be x1. Then I want to go and search for y1. So let's just start off by adding our x1 to our return array. So I'll say return, and now I'm going to use the JavaScript method push, and push allows me to add a new member to my return array. And what I want to push is nums, and I want to push the very first element. So arrays start at index 0, so this is perfect for my counter. So rather than putting 0 in here, I'll put my counter, and you'll see why now when we go to the next line. So now I've got my x1 over here. If we look, this x1 is passed into my return array, but now I need to get my y1. And how would I get my y1? So it's actually pretty similar to this line. So we're going to be adding to the return array, and we're going to be pushing to it. And we're also going to be using nums because we're going to be looking in that array, because that's the array that's been passed in. But we don't want to add the counter, which in this case would be 0. We want to put in the counter plus the given constant space, which is n. So now we'll be pushing our first element, which will be 2, and then we'll be counting on another 3, 1, 2, 3. So then it'll be pushing this tree into our return array, which is what we want. And we want to do this until we get to the end of the array. So I'll just take out that I. And there's one more thing we want to do. We want to make sure that we increase our counter. So we can do this by saying counter plus plus. So this counter plus plus, we'll just add 1 to our counter every time it goes inside our while loop. And this is very important because if we didn't have our counter plus plus, we would just end up in an infinite while loop and our program would never come to an end. Or it would eventually come to an end when our computer ran out of resources. So let's run this and see are we successful. So we can see that this is our input that we get, and this is our output, and this is our expected output, and you can see they're both the same. So we've got this accepted. I hope this video helped you. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. If you like the video, leave it a like and subscribe if you want to see more of this type of content. Thank you. Have a good day.